are headed to spend some time in Boston. After our meal, a local showed us the site of newlywed couple Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King's home and where they caught the inspiration of the Embrace statue in downtown Boston.
I lived in one of these buildings here, which is the front of it is a Mass Ave, and he lived right here.
Oh, he did?
Yes, there's a plaque. If you walk around, there's a plaque on the building where Martin lived. And she lived down the street.
Wow.
So this is where they caught it.
I didn't know he used to live in Boston.
That's right, Boston College.
Yeah,
oh,
and
wow.
she went to New England Conservatory.
Did you get a
classical
picture?
pianist?
I did.
She was a classical pianist.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you
That's
said the plaque
pretty
is
cool.
right over there?
Yeah, in that building. You have to go around
Okay.
that nonsense.
Okay.
Maybe a little later.
Maybe later.
This is the famous Embrace statue modeled after Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King hugging each other. It is here in Boston, and I think it's new as of maybe this year, maybe last year, so it's very new, but this is very cool to see. They have this beautiful message sitting right behind this really big statue. Let me zoom out so you can see. Oh, there we go. So big. Go stand next to it, Ami, for comparison. Yeah, it's very big. Ami's 5'9", so yeah, pretty tall. So tonight, we'll be going on a ghost tour of all the most haunted sites here in Boston, okay? I'm talking, I don't know. We'll find out tonight, but it's gonna be great. And I'm really excited, because we all like scary stuff, so. Woo! So we've done stuff like this before in Savannah, so it's not gonna be too new, but I think because there's so much history that happened in Boston, like with the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere, American Revolution, there might be more historic ghosts, historic hauntings. That seems pretty cool, very cool to me, so we'll see how we feel, if we get the chills or anything, but. They got an EMF reader, so it reads paranormal activity, so they'll be able to see if there's cool things going on.
No, very simple.
You look over your shoulder to see if there's any actual ghosts.
We got you guys covered.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're sorry, you got me. Thank you.
Wow.
So if it stays in the beach, then there's activity?
Yep.
Okay.
She said red means what?
Ghosty.
Ghosty.
Yeah, let's see what
All right, let's see if it's official or not.
Good evening, everyone.
Wow.
And welcome to Boston. Now, if you're here, I'm assuming you all know that Boston is one of the most historically significant cities in the United States. And because of that long history, that long age, is a big reason why Boston is known for many notable hauntings. It's the oldest public park in the history of the United States. And throughout its long lifespan, it has seen many, many different public events throughout its time. However, during its earliest days, it was home to not the liveliest of events. The early Puritans who called Boston home would use this spot in the public park for their public executions. Is that the Grim Reaper? Many of whom were done to the ideological rivals of the Puritans, the Quakers. Naturally, with all of the death that has occurred here in this spot, a willow that once stood there saw the sight of many different hangings, and a plaque standing right there commemorates where it once stood. And many different forms of spirit have been witnessed by many of those who come around the Boston Common, from shadows hanging from the trees. But two specters in particular stand out. The Weeping Woman. The identity of the Weeping Woman is somewhat contested. However, many believe her to be that of Quaker martyr Mary Dyer, who I will elaborate on further down the tour. The second is none other than the Puritan's executioner, who walks these streets carrying a Bible in one hand and a noose in the other. Woe to thee, whoever gets in the way of the Weeping Woman and the executioner. Woe that was felt firsthand by a jogger named Jocelyn, who one night, during a jog down here through the Boston Commons, saw the sight of what appeared to be a woman in distress. Naturally, Jocelyn approached the woman, hoping to see if she could help, unwittingly knowing that she had just gotten in between the Weeping Woman and the executioner. And as the woman in front of her disappeared before her eyes, Jocelyn didn't have time to process this as she felt a yank pull at her hair, tearing it out by the roots. Before she could process this thought, she felt herself being hoisted up by the trees. Luckily for Jocelyn, two bystanders were able to come across her just in time. According to the paramedics, had they not gotten her down any time sooner, Jocelyn would have been dead. No arrests were ever made in this case. The police believed they were looking for a real person. And the only evidence for this event was Jocelyn's eyewitness testimony and the rope used to string her up. A rope that mysteriously disappeared while in police custody. The first thing Jocelyn did following this event was purchase a treadmill. Follow me, we are on to our next spot.
Wow, there's so many tombstones right here. It is pretty cool.
Here we have the first of our two graveyards, the old granary burial grounds. The granary is home to many different revolutionary figures in American history. From Paul Revere, famous for his midnight ride, John Adams, famous for his signature, and Sam Adams, famous for his beer. Sam Adams actually made it a point to have every victim of the Boston Massacre be buried in his familial plot here in the granary. Now, no one quite knows how many people are buried here for a number of reasons. The first is that initially around up to 20 people would share a single grave.
Whoa. Wow.
Second is that during the Victorian era, all of the headstones were rearranged in order to make way for the latest in landscaping technology, the lawnmower. Now, for those of us who have seen Poltergeist, I think we all know that nothing bad can come out of this. And the other is that during the early scientific revolution, early medical students here in Boston would take to a peculiar form of extracurriculars. During the time, only a single cadaver would be loaned out to medical schools in order for their studies. Which of course was not enough for all of the studies that needed to be conducted. So, early medical students took matters into their own hands. Grave robbing. We went from Poltergeist to Frankenstein.
Wow.
The most tragic aspect of the granary is the infant wing. Built during a time of high stillbirths and infant mortality, around 480 children call the granary home. Naturally, this is an upsetting statistic. And it was one that caused a nurse named Beth to come down to the granary and leave behind a little toolbox to show these children that they were still appreciated. would come by after work and drop off toys. One night, however, after dropping off a teddy bear, as she began to walk away, she heard a child's laughter. Now, initially she thought that a family had brought their kid to the burial ground late at night. It is peculiar, but it's not out of the question. But then, the sound of a child's laughter turned into the sound of children's laughter. And she turned around to see the teddy bear she had just dropped off being played with by itself. And immediately, she bolted. Personally, I like to think that it was at least good to know that her gifts did not go unappreciated.
It's lighting up red!
When we pass the police
When we pass the police car, some spirits in there.
BLM.
Got a Black Lives Matter flag! Period. This is the most haunted building in Boston, room 303 specifically.
In the same context as a Stephen King short story, should really tell you the levels of macabre that goes on in this building. For the first 50 years of Massachusetts, the early Puritans had this as their sole burial ground. Because of this, Puritan iconography is sprinkled throughout all the different graves that line these grounds. One of which is actually the inspiration for Esther Prynne's grave in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Quick question, who here knows the expression dead ringer? Yes. Do you know what it refers to?
Isn't it identical twin?
Yes, but do you know where it comes from? You? Now, in the early days, discovering whether or not a person was dead... Yes. Yes. In the early days, for those of you unaware, in the early days, when deciding whether or not a person was dead was not an exact science, there would often be false positives when it came to burials.
Oh, that's right. Okay, the bell, yeah.
In order to combat this, they began tying strings to the deceased's fingers, strings that would lead up into the ground onto little bells. And if a person woke up in a coffin, all they had to do was hold their finger, and the bell would ring. A person would patrol the graveyard in order to keep an ear out for the different bells. And this is also where the phrase graveyard shift comes from. Now, occasionally there would be false positives. Either the wind would blow, something would bump into the bell, and they would dig up a deceased corpse, a dead ringer. But being buried alive is a somewhat common fear people have. And it's a fear that relates very heavily to the story of a man named Jerry, an electrician from Framingham. Jerry decided to come out here with his family late one night in order to just see the sights of Boston. But his family, they didn't want to, for some reason, didn't want to see an old burial ground. They wanted to waste their time going shopping down in Newbury Street. But Jerry, obviously not wanting to waste his time shopping, decided that he was going to tour the burial grounds himself. Jerry was basically alone as he walked across the burial grounds, and he began to hear a noise. He couldn't quite make out what the noise was, but he began walking closer and closer and closer, and as he got closer to the sound, he made out what it was. It was a person crying for help, and the sound was coming from his feet. Realizing that he was hearing someone buried alive, he ran into the chapel and told the person that he was going to go find help. He found someone, a staff member, inside the chapel and told them, "Help, there's someone buried outside in the graveyard." When they got there was no noise. It was then that the staff member became very cold towards Jerry, as the grave that he brought him to was evidently the site of an urban legend about someone who was buried alive. A legend that was debunked. But Jerry insisted, no, I did hear somebody. But the staff member blew him off. Jerry recounted his tale to his family, who promptly laughed in his face. But late that night, while Jerry was lying in bed, he suddenly changed location and was in some sort of dark spot. He couldn't make out anything. There was no light. All he could tell is that he was in something wooden. It wasn't until he heard the sound of wood, of dirt piling on top of the wood, that Jerry realized he was in a coffin and he was being buried. Rightfully terrified, Jerry began pounding on the top of the coffin. Help, help, I'm still alive! Nothing. The dirt kept piling. As it kept piling and piling, he kept going, help, help, I'm still alive! No one responded. As he could tell that the dirt was almost completely on top of him, he became desperate, and he started clawing at the top of the coffin. Help, help, I'm still alive! No one heard. And as he kept clawing and screaming and crying, he woke up. And he began crying and sobbing, so loud it awoken his wife, who at the sight of the distress her husband was in, she began to cry too. And she did what she could to console him. It's okay, it was only a dream. And as Jerry began to calm down, he felt a deep pain coming from his hands. When he turned on the light, he saw his hands mangled, his fingernails bleeding and mangled, his knuckles red, raw, and bone. The last thing Jerry remembers before passing out was the sight of the horrified look on his wife's face. Never again did Jerry's family laugh at his tale. And with that, that concludes our main tour. I hope you all learned something new about Boston, had a fantastic, spooky time,